Greetings, my excellent friend. Welcome to the Heavy Metal History Report.
Dan, let people know who you are, what you do, and then we'll go from there.
Hello, everybody. My name is Dan Swanö, and I was once upon a time the singer from a band called Edge of Sanity. And these days I am mixing and mastering stuff most of the time, and also have some projects like Nightingale, Witherscape, and Second Sky, and so on.
Yeah, man, you're involved with so many projects for such a long time. Your body of work is just legendary to I guess, for lack of a better term. I mean, you've had your hand in so many bands. It's just crazy.
Well, yeah, but a really big batch of those were projects. But for some reason, because I had access to a recording studio really from the end of the 80s, that produced pretty okay results. You know, you kind of presented each project into the world as if it was a band. Because it sounded like guys were rehearsing, but some of that stuff was like a one-off, or a few rehearsals and then a recording, and then nothing ever happened again. So but a few projects actually went on to sign record deals, and it's cool. That's the kind of way I like it, to mix and match genres, and so I tend to get bored extremely easily with music. So that was really a good way for me to just try out different things until I kind of knew what it was that I really wanted to do.
It's crazy to me because like I always knew you from back in the day as being in Bloodbath, and then kind of more when I started to branch out into music, I kept seeing your name pop up as, like a producer and engineer on all these records. And I was like, man, he's done a lot of stuff besides like being in Bloodbath. And then when I started this podcast and I'm like doing all this research for these bands and like who produced their records, your name just comes up on like all these bands. And I'm like, holy crap. I think now's a good time to try and talk to him because especially, I told you the year I'm covering is 94. And I mean, you're probably on at least half the records. I'm exaggerating a little bit there, but you're on a lot of them that you've like produced or helped get out there. And in fact, the one that like really made me try to seek you out was I was exchanging emails with Frederick from the band Dawn.
Yeah.
And I kind of asked him about like their record and how they made it and working with you and everything like that. And I was like, yeah, this would tie in like pretty perfectly. So probably a good time to see if you'd be interested in doing this.
Yeah, and I was.
Yeah, that's awesome, man. So let's go back for a minute, because the thing I usually like to start with here is people's influences, like what drew you into heavy metal and how did you kind of get into it, and what was it about it that like kind of struck a chord with you when you first heard it?
Well, I grew up with two older brothers. One is 10 years older and the other one is 16 years older than me. And during the time that they both lived at home, when I was just really young, especially my oldest brother, he was really into this kind of new wave of British heavy metal and that kind of stuff really early. And that, of course, rubbed up on my 10-year older brother. And before I knew it, I was listening to this kind of proto heavy metal stuff, like the first 2-3 Judas Priest records and this kind of stuff. And there's pictures of me with headphones when I don't know, I'm 3 or 4 tops, listening to the first Kiss records. And they just kind of saw that I liked music. At that age, it's not really, you're not so genre specific. You just like something because you think it rocks and you dance around to it or play air guitar or whatever. And that was, I was kind of indoctrinated with that kind of hard rock thing. I would not say heavy metal because my brothers were never really into heavy metal. They are more like hard rock.
Yeah.
Until it's kind of bordering on becoming heavy metal, they don't like it anymore. And I think also then when my oldest brother moved out and I was just having my 10-year-old brother like in the next room with paper thin walls, I could hear everything he listened to when I was trying to fall asleep. And he changed his taste then more into progressive rock at the end of the 70s, in the early 80s. So through the wall, I heard all the big bands there. You had Jess, you had Genesis, you had Gentle Giant, Kansas, UK, Asia, all that stuff. And as any responsible big brother, he made me mixtapes.
Nice.
And they kind of reflected what he was listening to at the moment. So he gave me kind of what I used to kind of call post-prog, when the progressive rock bands did not really go for that 20-minute noodling or write proper songs, but still with kind of a progressive rock twist. He taped me endless tapes of that, and I listened to them to death. So my musical DNA is small pieces of that kind of dark and mysterious early hard rock from, let's say, 72 up to like 77. Then that kind of accessible progressive rock. That's really what's in there, you know. And then when my 10-year-old brother, I can call him Dog because that's his name.
Yeah.
When Dog drifted off into kind of more extreme stuff like Frank Zappa and freeform jazz and all that stuff.
Oh, wow. That's awesome.
I was, not really into that. So I kind of drifted off and started exploring music that he didn't really approve of, because that was up until the point when I was like 10 or 11, that was really important that my brother liked it too. But when I stopped doing that, I discovered a lot of stuff on my own. And that's when I got involved in slightly harder and heavier music. I discovered Merciful Fate, which he completely did not approve of, but he really didn't care, you know. And then I remember I got a sampler EP called Hell Comes to Your House on a cassette from my oldest brother. And I had no idea which band did which song. You know, I had read somewhere that which bands would be on it, but no idea which song was from which band. So there was a lot of fast stuff, a lot of more aggressive, you know, and I was hoping every band would be Metallica because they seemed cool, you know?
Yeah.
But it turned out that the Metallica song was Creeping Death, and I found that one kind of boring at the time. I wanted everything to be fast, and, you know, it's you get into a new genre, and then you just want the most extreme part of that genre, you know, want to discover it. And somehow there around 84, 85, I knew that when the right record came out, I would probably really be interested in what later became speed and thrash. But it actually took up until sometime around 88 until I really went all in with that genre because of South of Heaven from Slayer. That was a bit cleaned up.
Yeah.
And I could appreciate the musicianship. They were doing a Judas Priest cover, which was also important as a kind of a crossover thing. And from that moment on, it was just full on. And there in the midst of all that, I had also started to dig deeper into the AOR kind of really commercial pop rock stuff without any progressive overtones. And that just, you know, that was the dawn of my kind of musical explosion, where just anything that moved me in any way, made me happy, made me sad, made me, I don't know, you know, just created an emotion. That was good music. And this is where I still am today. I'm not so genre fixated. You know, if a song is good, I don't care what it is, you know, I just like it.
Yeah, that's exactly how I am too, and have been for like a long time in my life. Like as much as I gravitate towards heavy metal, if like you were saying, man, if something is really good and it just strikes a chord with me, I'm going to listen to it no matter what it is, because it just, you're kind of limiting yourself. If you don't do that, you're missing out on like a whole broad spectrum of like different music. And I think people should be more open to that.
Absolutely.
It's, you know, it's really interesting to me too, because you were kind of in the heyday of thrash metal and like the really early beginnings of heavy metal. And you kind of got to see it evolve, you know, over time. And I think the hardest thing about that, the early days, is like finding music on your own, because you said you had two brothers that were like helping you discover music, but when you had to discover it on your own, like how hard was it for you to like go seek out new music? Like, how did you find all that stuff?
I would say that I spent a small fortune on terrible thrash metal records and really not so good heavy metal records at kind of record fairs or there was every now and then in the big shopping mall where I grew up, there was like a traveling record sale. You know, it was not really a part of the traditional record store. You know, it was like all of a sudden you came into the shopping mall and there it was just like so much vinyl. And you just started going through this discount bins, you know, with the cutouts and so. And I picked up a lot of cool records, but also a lot of terrible records at those things. And it was really, you had a small group of people and we would kind of give each other tips. You know, you had a few friends in your school class. There was one guy who liked Iron Maiden and this kind of stuff. And he always kind of, you must try out Iron Maiden. And I listened to a few songs and just didn't do anything for me. But sometimes your friends like kind of the wrong songs or the wrong version of the bands that you will later on, you know. For example, I was played a couple of Rush songs and I don't know, pretty much throughout my whole life. And it was always the wrong track for me to think, oh, that sounds awesome. I just thought it sounded super weird. But when I heard the right Rush track, that completely took me off guard. Then I just kind of started working my way backwards. And that was the same with Marillion, which is one of my absolute favorite bands. I always heard the wrong songs at the wrong time. And I thought, that's just a Genesis copy, you know, blah, blah, blah. But there was a lot of that going on. So I used to listen to a radio show in Sweden called Rockbox, where they always played like the latest stuff and also some obscure import stuff. And that's where I picked up a lot of my favorite bands through like one song that they played. It was pretty much always resonating with me. He was really good, that host, Per Fontander, was extremely good at picking really good radio shows, the flow of the tracks and so. And I would say that 80% of the Swedish metal mafia born between 1968 and 77, they were all influenced by Rockbox and the tracks he played. First time you heard Metallica was on that show. First time I heard Sodom was on that show, and so forth. You know, so there you could go out and think, I heard one song on Rockbox that was really good. I think I'm going to buy this record with a Warrior or Pretty Maids or Sinner or whatever, you know, because you heard that one song on Rockbox. And if you didn't have that guide once a week for an hour, you were extremely lost and in the hands of what was most marketed. Like EMI had Iron Maiden, they were shoving it in your face, you know? Yeah. So I guess that made a lot of Iron Maiden fans because the father thought, oh, I saw this, I bought this for your birthday. They were making really good commercial for it at the store. And this is how some bands get into the homes, you know, not through the quality of the music, but they are displayed well because they are selling, they are making money for the shops.
Yeah, it seemed like especially back then too, because the genre was still really new, that a lot of record companies were just eating up every band they possibly could and just shoving them out there to be like, hey, buy this, regardless of the quality of it. And you see a lot of bands kind of put out one or two records and then just disappear. You know, whereas like the bigger ones obviously have lasted until now, you know, Slayer, Iron Maiden, Judas Priest, all still around, all still putting out records. And I think that shows, you know, not only like the songwriting ability they had back then, but just like, I think the appeal to a lot of people, you know, they kind of transcended the genre in terms of like, trying to word this kind of correctly. I think that they just like they were able to capture something a lot of people didn't expect in that time. If that makes
they
sense.
also took the genre a little bit. I mean, what they all did, they took slow steps towards maybe a sound that always would work still with the core fan base, but they kind of took things a little. I mean, if you listen to Maiden from the first record up until when I stopped following them, it's like Summer in Time. It's kind of still there, the core, the three chords that they like to use all the time with a twin harmony on top. But they slowly kind of evolved in some ways. On Killers, you had tracks like Prodigal Son.
Yes.
And then you had also on Peace of Mind and stuff a little bit different, more progressive. I mean, I know Steve Harris is a progressive rock nut, you know, but he slowly worked that in, just a few percent. You know, it's not like, okay, now we're progressive rock. They just kept that core. And the same was with a lot of bands that had a great success for a longer time. They kept to their style and evolved slowly.
Yeah.
And then came the changes where like your whole genre is outdated, you know. Then came like with the grunge or with the new metal. Then some bands kind of lose their footing and took one step too far too soon. But most of them could kind of come back from this. They were easily forgotten when heavy metal was okay again, you know, and that is what happened to all those bands. I mean, Maiden had their Bailey things, Priest had their Ripper things, you know, and Saxon went to be an AOR band for a while and came back heavier than ever, you know, and this is, and I think also the bands, they were functioning as like a company really early on. They were touring, recording, writing on the road, recording on the road. They were just like, this is our life. And everyone was in on it, the label, the management, and they just kept making everyone happy. You know, maybe apart from a few band members, but they were just, I mean, when I read the biographies from these bands, which I tend to read pretty much everything that is available there, you see there was a non-stop roller coaster of work from the moment they got signed until they kind of, I don't know, imploded or whatever happened to them, you know? Some bands just didn't have the work ethic to survive and become one of those few genre survivors, you know?
I agree with that 100%. It seems like, especially like, because I read a lot for when I started this podcast about Black Sabbath, and it seems like for a decade straight, that's just all they did, you know, touring and writing and recording. Obviously, the drugs didn't help with their downfall, but I mean, they were a workhorse, man. And I mean, what other bands do you know that put out, you know, basically 2 records in a year? That's just how much material they had in the beginning, and they just never stopped working. But, you know, in the end, it caught up to them because they did kind of implode there. It's kind of a lost art on bands these days because everything's so immediate for our generation that there's no longevity to anything anymore. It's like you have to just like keep putting out music, otherwise people forget you in like 5 minutes.
Absolutely, and it's never been worse than it is now. But I mean, there's a few bands that I've had the privilege of working with. One example is Opeth, and another is a band called Millencolin. They're in completely different genres, but I felt early on when I both Opeth, I did the first 2 records, and with Millencolin, I did the first 3 records, the second demo, you know, and all that really early stuff. I felt early on that these guys, they see it different. This is not a hobby. This is their life. And I just kind of felt from the moment on that they are going to make sure that this is their life. This is their living. They're going to be going on, you know, through thick and thin, how hopelessly out you are. And I mean, Millencolin even changed music style and kept their fan base, and they just plow on. And they both, Millencolin just released a new record, and Opeth will, you know, pretty soon. And they're just huge, you know, and they were just different. Some other bands like, oh, they have such potential, but they did not put in the hours. They did not do the management, the touring, the fact that you have to make a living off your music thing with thinking up merchandise structures and all that. So many bands didn't. They just were like completely like, oh, cool, we have a record deal. What now? You know? For them, that was just a piece of the puzzle. And I mean, Opeth delayed the first records with, I don't know, maybe even a year, negotiating their first record deal. I mean, I didn't negotiate anything on any record deal ever. I just signed it. Cool, release records, you know? But they pumped up the royalty rate. They made sure they had less and this and that, you know? And took it to lawyers. And I said, what you're doing? You're signing for a small underground company. Yeah, but maybe that's why. I mean, look what happened to the early Judas Priest stuff. Yeah. The rights are gone. And there's like 1,100 compilation albums of the first 2 records and this and that. And I just felt this is what's missing. Bands are just like, oh, we got a record deal, cool. And that's the end of it. In my case, Opeth and Millencolin, in some ways also Katatonia, they are still out there doing stuff. They became really bands of the same kind of magnitude like some really big heavy metal band from the 80s. Because they are not afraid of this 40-hour flight to do a gig and then back. They just do it, you know, march on like soldiers.
Yeah, I think
it's one reason, you know, why they're still around.
Yeah, no, I agree. I mean, all those bands, you can tell they put in a lot of work, not just like pushing their genre forward, but I mean, just in their own personal artistic like outlets with the bands, and they've really tried to like maintain that throughout their careers very solidly. I mean, even you know, Katatonia and Opeth have seemingly changed genres just a little bit or changed their sound from one record to another, and that I think that keeps it fresher longer too. Without alienating too many people, hopefully, in the long run. I know there was a couple Opeth albums there where people were like, "What is this?" But I mean, they didn't give it a fair shot. You know, they just kind of immediately wrote it off without actually listening to the work that they put into it. In my opinion, anyways.
Yeah, that was a pretty big change for a band that had a style going enough to have a complete army of tribute cover ripoff bands.
Yep.
To change completely their formula, of course, was a big thing. But I must mention also another band that I've never worked with, but still they have this great career, is Amon Amarth from Sweden. I just saw the documentary about them, 25th anniversary thing there. And they are just an example of this. They just kind of took it to that, let's have a company level, let's have management, let's have all that, let's be a real band. Even though we play death metal, let's be a big band, as big as we can be, you know? And it was, for a while, it's like, that's only death metal. You don't need a manager. You don't, you know, but of course you did. When you want to make a living, when you want to make enough money every month to put people on salary, you need to make the money somewhere, and then you need to run a successful business, you know, and regardless of music. And some people just don't have it in them. I never went even close to be a musician for a living. I've always been a recording engineer, mix engineer for a living. Yeah. That also played a bit music on the side. I am so grateful that my big thing is not being a musician, touring and playing on stage, because the times are really rough now. The competition is fierce, you know?
It really is, man. I mean, I hear so many things, because I toured for a brief amount of time, like, I guess for like 5 years. And this was like a decade ago now. So, you know, things were a lot different a decade ago than they are now. But even back then, like, things were so just like flooded, for lack of a better word, and it was hard to even, you know, I was touring with a newer band, so it was just like clawing tooth and nail, you know, playing for like $150 a night. And I mean, that's not fun, but it is at the same time, because you're, you know, traveling the country and getting your music out there to people. And albeit I was like in a crew capacity with the band, but seeing them like get their music out there was like, well, damn, these guys are putting in the work, but for what? You know? Yeah,
this is it's really high failure rate with this kind of up and coming support band things. But it's so, you need to be so good on so many levels. I mean, the songs have to be good, but you have to be good with the social media thing. You have to be good really on stage. You have to be so organized with everything. And you need all the help you can get from having people like almost on staff to keep this. You know, you have your manager, you have your booking agent, you have your road crew. Yeah, that's what you need to make it today again. I mean, in this time when people were making records over the internet, still selling a lot of records because there was no real download Napster problem. That's when you could have a project and still shift really much money. Yep. And the members had never met. But these times are over. Now you need to be good on stage and have actually your shit together, or you will be eliminated. That's just the order of things. And it's back to the way it was in the 70s. Go touring your fucking ass off, maybe get a record deal, and then maybe you go bigger, but you still have to tour your ass off, but maybe to 1,000 people rather than 100 people. So that's it.
Yeah, no, it's all about how you kind of present yourself these days, as opposed to songwriting almost. In some respects, there are definitely bands that like, they know they're focusing on their music more than like presenting themselves out there. And it's a weird double-edged sword, you know. It's like nothing's right or wrong these days, but man, it's just all, it's so competitive now. I talk to so many bands, and that's all they, you know, ever talk about. It's like, yeah, it's hard. I mean, we're just trying to make sure we put out the best music we can, but, you know, we're also limited because we know that within 6 months to a year, people are gonna be like, when are you putting out new stuff? Yeah, just put something out, you know. Something you touched on though that I really wanted to kind of talk to you about is how you've like, in some respects, fostered a lot of the Swedish metal scene. I mean, you seemingly helped out like a ton of bands, like you mentioned, like Opeth and Katatonia, and you played in some respects a little bit on, with Katatonia. I mean, how did you, or what made you want to do that? Why did you want to like help foster the scene, so to speak? Because it seems like you really had a passion to help all these bands out and really support them and their music.
Well, what happened was that from pretty much, I would say that I recorded and mixed my first demo for a band that I was not in November of 1989.
Okay.
And from that moment on, bands were always asking me if I could record their demo, because even though I had only 4 tracks on a cassette machine, I got better sounds than the other local 8-track or the other studios with 16 or 24, because they did not understand anything harder than pop music,
Yeah.
So I did a lot of work, and I am still to this day, when somebody wants me to mix their record, and in this time it was, of course, recording and mixing, I feel honored, because there are choices out there, I'm not the only one. So
yeah.
It's like, okay, you chose to work with me rather than going to Sunlight or whatever. I'm going to give it my very best. And when a band like Katatonia, for example, showed up, and not being really so prepared like you expected a band to be, and not being able to perform some of the drum parts, and feeling that the sound could be expanded, which would make them sound better, make me sound better as a studio, it would make Katatonia probably get a record deal, and I would most likely be the guy recording that record. That's how I thought. It was not like I was employed by the state and we're super annoyed that they showed up, and it's just like, hey, get over with it. This was a one-man operation. I was making a living from it, and just thinking a few steps ahead. If I'm an asshole now, they will never come back. But if I am at my best behavior and say, oh, let's add keyboards here, let me play a lot of the guitar harmonies and try to flesh out your songs. I mean, the riffs and the basic arrangements, that was all from the band.
Mm-hmm.
But there is a main difference there from just letting the guys have like a guitar, bass, drums, and vocals. I thought keyboards would be perfect with your music. And once you add them, there's no turning back. It just changes the whole aura of the music. And I was right. That first Katatonia demo, they scored, I think, a deal to release it on a cassette label, and a mini CD came out, and all of a sudden they had a record deal, and I made the first album. I recorded pretty much everything they did up until the point that I quit recording in 96, 97. So that one paid off. And the same with Opeth. That was not really much to do, but I think that this was the first studio experience for Opeth. And I know that they were a bit disappointed with the fact that my so-called studio at the time was not really a studio. It was a rehearsal room with semi-professional gear. And they came from Stockholm, there are studios in every corner that looks like a studio with the big machines and the big consoles and shit, But I think they could have been really wrong in a really big studio at that time, because they were so like, I think my rehearsal room-ish recording, I never called it Unisound Studios. It was always Unisound Recordings, because I didn't really say this is a studio. No, I said this is a place where you can record shit, That was the main difference. And I think it was good for them to be in this environment, because it was kind of different than being in one of those sterile studios where, the engineer was just looking at. Yeah, and this is, I think, what made many bands come back, was that they appreciated this after the first initial shock that, oh, this is not a studio, what is this? They felt relaxed, and there was not this control room, recording room, long corridors of walking. We're all in one room, and everything was recorded. And I mean, the Dissection guys, they were recording 2 guitars, bass, and drums at the same time, all having that eye contact with the drummer, and just like, being in rehearsal, but you had headphones on rather than a PA system, or listening to your amps live, and that made it, of course, also easy to record really quickly. And you could have the vibe. You could hear already there that was a good take, because you heard all the instruments pretty much straight up.
Yeah, if I'm being honest here, those Dissection albums are some of my favorite sounding albums. I don't know what it is about them, but man, there's just some ambiance or sound that was captured on those records that is not on a lot.
I know. Thank you. There was, from a sonic perspective, they all have their flaws, but sure. What happened was that you captured something that just kind of worked. And there are a lot of strange albums out there from pretty much every decade. I love the early Merciful Fate albums for what they sound like. That's a part of the music, I don't want to hear them remixed with a cleaned up sound. I want it kind of becomes one with the songs. And that's a little bit what's going on later in the years, when everything was so perfect sounding. The kind of the ambience that came with a somewhat strange sound is kind of missing. I like sometimes records that sound like that record and no other record. And both Somberlane and Storm of the Lightsbane have a very unique sound. Yep. I'm not saying it's the best, most hi-fi, most balanced sound, but they do sound like those records. And that's it, it gives it a special flavor. And that's what I enjoy knowing now. That's what happened in those days. Then later on, things got a bit more stereotype. You could save settings. You say, don't touch that. That's still here from the previous recording. Let's have their drum sound, That was all just torn down and built up for every session.
And, you talked about everybody kind of being like comfortable in the setting, when they were recording with you. And like, was part of that because you guys were all peers and, like the same kind of music, so to speak? Was that part of why, or was it just because everybody just had a good rapport and were trying to build the scene together?
Yeah, I think in some ways, being a part of something that was still not really fully evolved. The death metal genre and also that second coming of the black metal style when death metal was already around. The first was like a continuation of Motorhead and Venom kind of thing. But once black metal came back, you already went through this death metal phase usually as a musician, and that nice combination of it that I think Dissection nailed on the first record and parts of the second, when it's kind of a mixture between black and death and heavy metal. Mm-hmm. That's what we all felt. That's pretty new. We were actually creating something, and as an engineer, to be part of creating a guitar tone that guys are still trying to copy 25 years later, that's of course cool. And also from the point of the music, that the guys were like, maybe we add this, and this became then kind of a standard feature when you want to have a certain sound. This was of course inspiring and pushing the genre in different directions. And can we have this much reverb? Yeah, I don't know. Let's see what happens, And the rules were not really written. And of course, but also the fact that I was the same age, and then sometimes even younger than the bands I was recording, made it, of course, also a little bit more loose, rather than having this 40-year-old trained engineer who didn't really care for your music, just looking at the meters and making sure all the levels are cool. I was more like a part of this. I was really into recording and mixing and just being a part of it. That was really amazing for me, that bands chose to travel sometimes 3-4 hours in a car, and later on even coming from, I don't know, Italy, Lithuania, Norway, whatever, to this moldy fucking cellar without a toilet, without windows, and record their albums rather than do it in their own backyard. I felt that was super. And of course, I was on my best behavior, trying to give it my very best,
So how did your love of wanting to record start? That's a big undertaking, especially in the early days, where everything was very analog. Like what made you want to start doing that?
I have to blame my brother Dog again, because he was recording stuff all the time. I mean, there are recordings of me dating back, I think, from like 77 or whatever, where him and me are recording stuff together. You know, he's playing guitar and I'm singing.
That's awesome.
And then we had a band together a little bit later on, the Three Brothers, and that's also recorded. It's still around, and they were really into this recording and experiment with the stereo field. That one is more to the right, and that one's more to the left, and always making comments about how records sounded, like interesting soundscapes and depth and all that stuff. And of course, it rubbed off on me. So I would say a big part of me being in a band was recording this stuff, you know. And my first proper band was called Ghost.
Yes.
And we just released that double vinyl with all that stuff we did between 83 and 88. And we were like, okay, we have written a couple of songs, let's record them. You know, that was super important, way more important than to play them to a crowd or to friends. We wrote, we recorded them, and they were kind of captured then. And then sometimes we never played that song ever again because it was done. Like I don't know, it sounds really like piece of art, but for us, that was the ultimate version of that track.
Yeah.
Why would we want to play it again and make it sound not so good when we can just listen to it on that tape when we nailed it? And that, you know, that was it. And that's the way I still feel about music. I write it, record it, and mix it to be in that one perfect freeze frame thing, you know? And I don't really care much for playing it live because I don't think it adds anything to my music. It only destroys my original idea about it. I mean, when I would play music that sounded like Venom, fine, then it would come alive when it's 180 decibel on the stage in full chaos and be completely messed up by being recorded at all. But my music is not about that. You know, I always had a sound of the finished product in my head when I was writing a song from a really early age on, and it's still there, you know. So that's a really big part of my musicality. And I remember going down to the studio and kind of, okay, I must really make this whole sound for that kind of SoCal melodic hardcore punk better. So now I will write a song that sounds like Bad Religion, but only to mix it, to experiment with different guitar sounds, drum sounds. But there was no band there I could experiment with. So I just kind of wrote a song, recorded all the instruments myself. But the main idea was to learn more about the genre and how to make it come out of those speakers, just like Mr. Brett did with the Bad Religion records. You know, that's how I kind of found new genres and grew as a musician. It was always about recording and mixing. So that's why I'm like happy as a pig in shit doing it for a living since, you know, a pretty long time. And that's what I hope I will be doing for a living until I eventually clock out, you know?
I think that's like speaks incredibly well to like your talent, not only as a musician, but as an engineer as well, because you force yourself to learn all these other styles, which I don't think a lot of people would do. I think they would be just pigeonholed on one thing because that's either what they want to record or what they know to record best, instead of like pushing the boundaries of their talents and limitations. And I think that's what makes you a little bit more prolific than a lot of people would realize, you know?
Yeah, when they have a big hit with a certain sound, it's really hard to get away from this because the band come to you for the sound. And I had that going on for a while, and I felt incredibly caged. There were like German bands booking because we want the dark funeral kick drums. I was like, oh, fuck, you know, can we not invent our own kick drums or whatever?
Yeah.
No, they wanted to sound exactly like that other record I had done. That's why they came to me, not to find their own sound, you know? And I have no problem. I mean, even to this day, I asked the band for a reference album to get a little bit a vibe of what is a fat sound to you? What's like a really punchy snare drum? What do you think? Oh, it must be this. No, I want to hear it. Find me a record with a punchy snare drum. So that's my language, you know, because you can say, oh, it should be bright and blah and blah. I don't care. I need to hear it.
Yeah.
Does it even exist? Is that even possible? And sometimes I'm so amazed by, is this a fat guitar tone? There's like no bass in it. For me, a fat guitar tone is like Massacre from Beyond. It's like all booming bass and screechy treble. For some people, it's like a sound with no bass, but a lot of attitude. I think, oh shit, good that you played this to me, because I would have given you an inversion of that sound, because that's fat to me. So that was all the time. So I wanted to be able to copy the Sunlight sound, the Morrisound sound. I wanted to be able to give the bands a sound that I felt was needed. And if it meant half Morrisound, half Sunlight, I could do that, And of course, working with bands like Millencolin and all their followers, I had to learn different kinds of hardcore and melodic punk sounds.
Yeah.
And then came the whole crustcore. All of a sudden, I was recording like a crustcore band a week. And then I had to go on that old Discharge, old No Security, all that. It's like, oh shit, I had to learn that not to tweak shit so much. I have to stay away and let shit be natural, which sometimes can be harder than you think, because you have a few internal tweaks that, oh, this is how a kick drum should at least sound, but no, that's way too metal. Let's make it sound like no attack at all, just like a thud. I think, okay, if that's what you want, and don't do it. No, this is not my sound. Get the fuck out, Just, you're paying me for a service.
Yeah.
So I'm gonna give you what you think you want, and it's not my fault when this turns out to be completely wrong. But I could give you an advice that maybe it will not play well on a vinyl record or a cassette, but you're paying me to do this shit, so it's a service profession, mixing and mastering and recording. It's not where I am this almighty person telling you to change the key or the tempo or kick out the drummer. That's what a producer can do. Mm-hmm. But they don't hire me to produce their shit. They hire me to record it or mix it. And I see this every day, so that's like a sonic handyman. That's what I do.
I mean, it seems like you do your best to be, diplomatic in those situations where you're like, hey, I could probably help you with this, but if this is what you want, that's fine. Which is probably like the hardest part about that job, I assume.
I don't really work with people in the room anymore, which
wow.
is for me a complete blessing. I made sure it was none of that. Once I got back into mixing and mastering, first kind of every available hour after my full-time job, and then eventually this turned into half-time and now full-time, I made sure all communication is through email and everything happens over the internet, even with people living 5 minutes walking distance away from me.
Yeah.
Because then I know that they're listening in their own hi-fi. They listen when they feel like listening to it. They play it to their friends. They play it in their car. Then I know that when they are happy, not in the studio happy, which is completely different. Because then you get this, like when I came home, couldn't hear the cowbell. And I was like, hey, now I have to remix it all because of the cowbell. Yeah, it sounded good in the studio. That just doesn't work for me, I need you to listen to it all the time where you listen to shit, where your reference is. And having 5 people running around all the time telling me to lower and change stuff or whatever, I mean, the attention span from a musician is like 25 seconds anyway. Mm-hmm. Then they sit on the sofa with their phones and don't care and just steal your precious oxygen. You know what I mean? So I like this method. It works really well for me. And surprisingly many guys, even big names like Bob Clearmountain and so, they work also this way because people have lives. They're out touring, they are still recording, and they go then via Skype when there's a lot to talk about, really. But I prefer to get lists from guys like 1206 Race kick drum. Fine, I will do it. That's what you want, then I will do it. This is my profession. You ask me to do something, and the next email, lower kick drum, But at least we try,
I suppose, too, that does relieve a lot of the pressure of being in the studio, knowing you're but spending money and time, and you're making compromised decisions because you're worried about the money. And with that, you can just focus, like you're saying, just listening, and it takes a lot of that pressure off, I'm sure.
Yeah, it really does.
So you play pretty much everything, right? Like guitars, drums, bass, vocals, you're a multi-instrumentalist, correct?
Yeah, I would call. I mean, the fact is that my guitar playing and bass playing is kind of limited because I take a normal guitar and just fling it over left-handed.
I've seen that.
Making the thick string is down and the thin string is up. It's hard to explain that. That makes it hard for me to learn shit written by a traditional guitar player, and it makes my style hard to kind of translate to a normal guitar player's style. But it works. But I would say that's something I could do maybe in a cover band. Playing traditional pop rock songs is playing drums, somewhat keyboards, and sing when the shit is in my range. But I could never really be a full-on guitar and bass player. I'm a little bit too limited in this, especially these days. I suck so hard sometimes. I don't know what's going on, you know. But I'm this kind of guy who believe, okay, I didn't play guitar now for 6 years. I'm probably better than ever. So let's just nail that guitar solo. And it's like, what's this? You know, I cannot even play. I cannot bend. I cannot do anything. And it takes me a long time to get back to even being somewhat decent. Drumming is different. It's just like riding a horse. It just fall back in the pocket, works. Because I am a drummer. Mm-hmm. All that other shit I learned to do because I had to be able to do my own demos, to learn how to record shit. You know what I mean? I kind of forced myself into, okay, you have to learn, even if you hold it upside down, learn the fucking guitar, bass, and this and that. So yeah, I kind of fiddle around a little bit with all instruments except like saxophones and shit. But to be a member in a band doing really serious stuff, I think when I write the stuff, yes, like with Nightingale, but to join a band and go on tour playing their material, never.
Oh yeah, that's got to be insane.
That's my kind of level, you know.
But I mean, you put out that Watchtower record, and that was all you wrote everything on that, right?
You mean Moontower?
Moontower, sorry, yes.
Yeah. That was like an album that I kind of had to do because of the shit that went on with Edge of Sanity and all that stuff, and I just felt that I needed to prove to myself that I wanted Edge of Sanity to go in a direction where I recorded everything for my songs and the other guys could do what the fuck they wanted with their songs, which is a completely stupid idea, but I felt that's the only way I can go on with the project. Okay. And I even tried kicking the other four guys out, leaving me the only member of Edge of Sanity. Stupid move, completely backfired, and they kicked me out. Dang. That left me there. Okay, what I do now, I tried for a few months to do a death metal album all by myself, but it just sounded like it really was, not from the heart, more from the wallet or from the, from like, what should I do? I must make Edge of Sanity music now, prove everyone that I could have done it by myself, but I couldn't. So instead, I turned to my progressive roots, my old heavy metal, hard rock roots, and just kind of made something completely different, but no one else would have understood the chaos in my head at the moment, mixing all those like Queenstrike with Opeth, with Rush, with whatever, and then growl on top of it. That had to be done by one person, that was like a one-man vision.
Yeah, and, especially in 1998, that's a very...
that was really out there.
Yeah.
It truly was.
So speaking of Edge of Sanity, that's why I kind of hit you up, because the Purgatory Afterglow is celebrating a 25th anniversary. Came out in 1994, but I assume everything was written and recorded in 1993, right?
No, absolutely not.
Oh.
I actually have here in front of me the studio diary from Unisound,
oh, awesome.
1994. And we actually started recording it on the 9th of July, 1994.
Okay.
And that's when we did drum and bass sound and recorded the drums for Enter Chaos and Elegy, all in one day.
Wow.
I mean, no 2 weeks for the snare drum. So, and I do know that most of the songs were written in the month leading up to it. Twilight was written like the day before we entered the studio.
Okay. Because
I felt we needed some epic stuff. And I know some of the tracks were written also just like weeks before. I was was teaching the guys the songs as they were recording it, pretty much punching in riff by riff, player by player, because they were so new that we never really rehearsed or anything. And that's my memory of that whole session, because I had just bought a new machine, a Fostex 16-track reel-to-reel recorder that had exceptional punch in and punch out qualities. My old machine would leave like a really ugly gap punching in and out, which made it completely impossible to kind of piece together a good take out of, rewinding, punching in, punching out. But this one was like you could punch in and out of feedback, and you just heard no, bad cuts, or what you want to call it, bad editing. Okay. So I could just pretty much teach the first guitar player, that's the riff, that's like 8 times. Okay, we recorded it. And then I stopped, taught him the next riff, rewind a bit, punch him in, and I'm pretty sure he forgot the first riff by the time he was playing the second, because that was the first time he ever played the riff ever. And that was the only way I could do it, because rehearsing, and I had the song in my head, how it should be. And Purgatory Afterglow was the first record where I wrote 8 songs completely alone.
Wow.
And then Benny and Andreas wrote 2 tracks completely without my input. For the Spectral Sorrows and the ones before, there was a little bit like a mix and match of one of the riff from this guy mixed with one of my riffs. No, I wrote it completely because the studio was so incredibly popular in this time.
Yeah.
And we were actually experienced a lot of other stuff going on in our lives. I had my son at home. He was like 6 months old, and there was very little time of doing any like sit down and write a song. When I came home from work, I had a 6-month-old kid. Here, he's yours now. And it's like, okay. And I took care of him pretty much until you kind of slept a few hours, and then went back to the studio to do some other black metal recording or whatever. So I just kind of tried to find hours here and there and just write stuff, and there was no time to really collaborate with the other guys. And that's why some shit was like, oh, I have a couple of more songs that I have written, but I will teach you in the studio. So that's how it happened, and they turned out surprisingly well, thinking that some of them had never played them before we actually recorded them. So that's pretty weird.
Yeah, no, I agree. I didn't realize it was written that quickly, and that's pretty amazing considering like how that record sounds. I listened to it again recently, and I haven't heard it in a really long time, and I was like, wait, this came out in 1994? It doesn't sound like it. Like, it sounds better than it doesn't even sound like a lot of metal that was even coming out around that time, and that's pretty hard to do, especially in 94, because black metal was pretty much taken over around that time.
Yeah,
death metal.
You can hear the black metal influence.
Yeah,
that was kind of. I couldn't help it. There was a lot of black metal going on at work, and there are some of those faster kind of dissection style, kind of a blast beat, but not really, but different than. I mean, some of the early Edge of Sanity stuff is so fucking fast, but it's more like a traditional. Fast kind of, at the gates kind of tuka, 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 but extremely fast. But the shit we were playing, or Benny was playing on Purgatory Afterglow, is that kind of opening riff of Black Horizons with Dissection kind of drum beat, which is a different beast than that other one. It's got more of a black metal vibe to it than the other one, which was more like a traditional fast Edge of Sanity beat. And we were inspired by that. I was inspired by that. This kind of melodic stuff, and I think it's something that makes it a little bit different than the Spectral Sorrows, when it was more anything goes, anything from a Manowar cover version to a Sisters of Mercy rip-off track to a Doom song to whatever. It's more streamlined, it's more like that style, and I think it was written so fast, and there were no demo versions, there was no thinking really. That just kind of made it sound how it sounds. And also there was kind of a pressure a little bit that stuff in this time should sound a little bit more natural, because Entombed had already gone away from that kind of sound they had on the first 2 records, where everything sounded a bit more processed with drum samples and, this kind of stuff. So it sounds really raw, like a garage rock record being a little bit pimped up with extremely weird guitar tones and, pretty dry. I don't think there's any reverb on the drums and ever on the whole record. So that was pretty unusual, but I guess it sounds weird and timeless because it sounds weird. You know what I mean?
It really does. I mean, that's the striking thing about it is it stands out from a lot of other stuff, because every time I do like a certain year, I pick out every record that was put out in that year and I listen to everything just to refresh my memory, or if I haven't heard of it before, find something new, so to speak. And every year there's like 5 records that like really stand out from like the list of 100 or whatever I have, and this was definitely one of them, which is why I was like, man, I should really just try and email him, see if he wants to talk about it. And I mean, that speaks to like a lot of stuff that gets put out in any time period. There's always these 1 or 2 records that stand out because of how they sound, or maybe they weren't so cookie cutter for what else was coming out around that time. They tried to do something different. And I think that this record, which is crazy to me that like, you were writing everything on the fly, but it seems like it wasn't rushed. Like you still methodically put time and effort into the songwriting. It wasn't just like, hey, I want to put this out to put it out. It's like, well, I'm creatively ready to go and I have all this stuff, so here it is, and it's just out there, and that's got to be a good feeling, I would assume.
Yeah, I was listening back to it, I'm surprised, but there were you came up with a few good riffs and you made them last, and it's one of those things. I don't really remember writing that stuff, but I do remember that it was there, and sometimes it was like I think it's I don't know which song it is, but I think it's Elegy or whatever, and it was okay, what happened after this second chorus? I don't remember. Okay, let's make a kind of a crust punk discharge riff. Okay, then there it is, the riff, and that's it. Then back to the verse, back to the bridge, back to the chorus, song over, And it's maybe the way some people do it when they demo stuff, or, even make that first kind of write/recording session, which later become a demo, which later become an album recording.
Yeah.
Some of that stuff was really written just minutes before it was recorded. Some stuff was written maybe a month, weeks before. And there were probably some cassettes of me with my acoustic guitar, just kind of recording the riff 1 or 2 times, and then that's the verse for that song, and that's the chorus. And some stuff was in my head, and one funny thing about the song Twilight was that we tried to put that verse riff in, I don't know, 2-3 other songs.
Oh, wow.
But the tempo was always wrong, and the vibe was always wrong, because that riff, it's got a very special driving kind of 4 on the floor beat. Mm-hmm. And there was just never any song where that would fall into place. And I also always considered it, that's just like a riff that can show up after whatever. But I just realized, I still remember the moment I realized it. No, I have to write a song for that riff. And it just kind of happened. And then all these other melodies and all that other, all the vibes just came from finding that pocket, because the song is pretty much in the same tempo the whole time. And then it was like, let's have this middle section, which have this kind of Mike Oldfield meets Misplaced Childhood by Marillion. Let's start the song with clean singing, and just, it's just like, it just all came together really quickly. And that's really all because that riff never fit any other track. I do have some old demos or whatever trying to squeeze that verse riff into another track, and every time I hear it, wow, that riff sucks so hard in that tempo in that song. And then you just slowed it down almost like, I don't know, not half the tempo, but a lot. Just like that version of Sad But True, mm-hmm. which is a lot faster. And it's like, what's that for a riff? And then Bob Rock came. No, it needs to be slower. It needs to drag that riff, And all of a sudden it gets that power. And that's what happened to that riff. It just became a beast. And I think, wow, pretty cool, And that's how Twilight just happened. It was all ideas, and it just kind of punch in, punch out, bam, there it was. It was really weird.
At least you tried to like foster that riff instead of like throwing it to the wayside and being like, it's not going to work.
It was too good, it was too good and too weird to not be a riff. And I just felt, and that was like the last track that was done, not 100% sure, the last, or like maybe some other filler track was written like the day before, but it was pretty much in the week leading up to recording, because you have a certain pressure in this time. Fuck, we only have 32 minutes worth of music. Fuck, what I do? I start recording on Monday. That's a really useful kind of power of the universe for a musician that can handle it. So many really good songs are written in that moment leading up to we are starting recording on Monday. You just kind of push yourself and like, fuck, that song is still missing. What am I doing? And you just go into a creative state that can only be forced upon you by crazy deadlines.
Yeah.
If you can handle them. Some people just lie down and cry, but some are like, I'm going to write the best fucking song ever. And you have some tracks like Carry On Wayward Son from Kansas is one of those tracks written in that period of time. And you say, hey guys, I just kind of have one more track. It's like, oh no, I thought we were ready. No, I promise you, this is a good one. And then bam, that's the big hit, changing everything. Not that Twilight was this, but this is one of the classics of the record.
Yeah.
And it was kind of made in that way that made me feel, oh cool, I can do shit with this genre and still get away with it. Because face it, the chorus in itself is kind of a pop song. But you growl the lyrics, it works, That was pretty weird.
Those are my favorite things to hear about, is when these songs that are like the hits or, the bigger, more well-known songs were, for lack of a better word, afterthoughts. They just kind of came up in the moment and you didn't think anything of it at the time, but when it hit, you're like, oh, dang, this song was kind of last minute, and now here we are. It's our biggest or most well-known song, or, best song on the album.
I know firsthand that Black Horizons was also one of those tracks on the Somberlane.
Really?
Joan wrote it on the bus to the studio in his head. Yeah, it's like, oh, yeah, but I have a few ideas, I want to try this out. And it's like, oh, okay, this guy is something different. And they just kind of rehearsed it and nailed it in the studio. Nobody had ever heard that song. It was all in his head. He had a few riffs, but the whole idea, how it should be and this and that, it was all not on any demo, nothing. It just kind of nailed it. And I thought, hey, wow, you too have this? I can write shit in my head. And sometimes I'm afraid of even making a demo because in my head it's already super, But it was new for me that also this kind of music could be written in the head, because I write more like traditional melodic pop songs in my head. Mm-hmm. Death metal, I really have to experience, feel it. But he just had that whole thing mapped out in his head. And that was also like, oh, cool, And I think that kind of inspired me to sometimes go with the vibe and just kind of, what's wrong with writing a song now in the studio, recording it? It could be super, because it's fresh and cool. And that's how we wrote Crimson also. Nobody had any ideas. We wrote it in 24 hours and bam, that was it. So that kind of taught us a little bit that you can write on the fly. Some bands even went into the studio without any songs and wrote in the studio as they recorded. And it's pretty dangerous, but when you are super inspired and you have more than one writer, it really works.
That's what I like hearing about the most, is everybody's like creative process. I've heard so many different stories of what works and what doesn't work for people. And I think the ones that I like the best are honestly the ones where it's like, we were just on crunch time and had no time left, but we busted out all these songs and look how the end product turned out. And then I hear about other people where they're like, oh yeah, we had like no time left and we're really overwhelmed and we couldn't get anything out. And, the end result wasn't as good as we could have wanted. And it's like, well, damn, why is it that some people just kind of crack under the pressure and other people's like rise above it and persevere and then get this amazing thing out? It's so interesting to me.
It's still there. There are some bands like 6-7 albums into the career make their best record.
Yeah.
And I'm like, where do you get all that shit? Because for a band like Omnium Gatherum, for example, I've been working with for 10 years, they just keep getting better and better. And it's like one songwriter pretty much.
Yeah.
I think and he's also writing stuff for Insomnium. It's like, where's your source? I mean, where you have that fountain of awesomeness that just keeps getting better and better. I mean, start sucking, No, it's just better and better. And this is a little bit like, but they have something going there. It's really interesting to hear it kind of only honing their craft, making it better and better, and just, I don't know. It's cool. I completely love it when this happens.
One funny thing about that band, their record was like in my top 10 of last year, and that song "Refining Fire" that they did. If you listen to that song, and this is just my opinion, maybe you'll agree. If you look at it in terms of execution and composition, that's a very metalcore, like early 2003, 2004 kind of sounding song, which is really unexpected if you didn't know what they looked like. If you just heard that song based off of how it's composed, it sounds like that early era of metalcore songs, but then you go listen to the rest of their stuff, it's completely different from that song, but it's such a good, catchy song that it doesn't really matter that it sounds that way.
Yeah, they do have their... I think there's a pattern also from their records that they do have the epics, and then they have some short, like they think how it's going to work on stage already. And they have that classic thinking. This is an audience pumper, and then they have a few stompier, a little bit slower stuff, and then they have this. I know that they have their little pockets of stuff, and they just keep going with that formula and write another epic and another kind of this. And yeah, might be so. I'm no professor of the metalcore thing, but there's a certain style of riffing and more simplistic stuff. Mm-hmm. And yeah, they have that too. They're not all about this, what I used to call AOR death metal. They kind of go more all in with the brutal style. And I'm sure there are plenty of bands out there that I have no idea how they sound in that genre, but that's probably what they like. They got hooked on some of those bands, and that's our blah blah track, because they are like one of the survivors of that metalcore thing, still kind of reinventing the genre. I don't know any names, but they do exist. That they come out of a genre and just kind of, we are the winners, but all the other are gone to the next hip genre. We will go on,
So what do you think it is about Sweden and the sound that you guys like really fostered, that melodic sound, because you didn't hear that really anywhere else as massive as from Sweden? I mean, you guys just owned it super hard. Like, why do you think you guys have such a good sense of melody? It's stunning to me how many bands just like forged that sound and made it as prolific as it is.
Yeah, I think Sweden have in this time, and maybe still, I don't know, very much like a musical education thing. They want to keep the kids busy. They want them to be into sports or into cultural things, So you actually got paid to form a band and rehearse by the state, It's like Monday at 6:00, you had a couple of hours in a room full of good equipment. You go there and find out if you're into music, or you go and see if you're into hockey or football or, I don't know, ping pong or whatever. But in this way, they made a really good job of this, the Swedish state. And I think the Swedish folk music have an extremely strong melodic sense to it. There's some countries' music is more like rhythm based almost. Yeah. It's like you're supposed to move to it, or I don't know, scream along to it or whatever. But the Swedish traditional music is extremely melodic and nice. And there are also some traditional songs that my mother used to sing to me to put me to sleep. They're really in a minor key, pretty sad stuff, And this kind of, you get to know that this is sad music, this is happy music, but it's got nothing to do with the rhythm of it, that it's happy or sad. It's kind of how the melody and all this come together, and you learn to appreciate this also through a lot of the Swedish hard rock and heavy metal. even a band like Europe, for example, who was extremely riff based, they always had killer guitar melodies that were not on top of the vocals, super melodic guitar solos, and killer vocal harmonies. And when you form a death metal band and you wanted it to be a little bit different than just kind of like riffing, which was based around a couple of notes and then just some cookie monster on top of it, leaving pretty much all melody out of it, that's fine. But what attracted me to death metal was that there was a melodic content in the riffing that I felt was reminding me of the more twisted type of classical music, or kind of the melodies that could be found in vocal harmonies or melodic solos from kind of darker heavy metal stuff. And the main writer in some of the most famous Swedish bands from this, they kind of grew up on that shit. So rather than you just having a riff based on a couple of really strange, notes or chords growling on top, they had like harmonies in the riff, or they had a riffing plus a twin guitar harmony plus growling, which made it kind of heavy metal, but death metal, but whatever. And any Edge of Sanity riff ever written, by me anyway, have a kind of a melody that I could play on the piano. Yeah. Because that is what it is for me. Occasionally you would have riffs like that verse riff from Twilight, of course, doesn't make sense on a piano. But that riff has got this doo-ga-doo-ga-doo. That was the weird part of that riff. I had never written a riff that had that kind of weird shit going on. And then kind of a chord pattern based on some other kind of unorthodox, weird, I don't know the notes that well, but it was kind of an ominous kind of chord progression. That was an evil riff, But then you have a that melody is, of course, in a minor setting, but you could easily translate it into a major key setting, and you have a happy kid song. That's how close you were all the time, balancing what kind of vibe you put the melodies in and what kind of backing chords you put on it. And I just like that about hearing some of Chuck Schuldiner's kind of riffing when it became clearer, like on the Leprosy record. There's so many ominous notes being played there. And that is what got me hooked on the death metal, because the thrash metal was all about and you either had a guy screaming like a dog or like some kind of melodic singer on top of it, Yeah. And the vocal harmonies were suffering a bit because there was no key to sing in. You just kind of sang whatever note, But death metal made it clear. The melodic content is in the guitar riffing. La, wah, wah, wee. Even some 4, 6, 8 weird notes, they kind of reminded you about, like I said, some twisted soundtrack, some twisted classical shit, and it made you feel something like, oh, those are ominous notes, plus that growling voice on top. This is pure evil. And that's what made me want to compose death metal. I wanted to put all that, and the more we wrote for Edge of Sanity, the more also melodic in a more traditional minor key, like that melody from Twilight or whatever. The riff became then more a little bit traditional heavy metal minor key melodies, but it was always melody. And Sweden, the folk music is extremely melodic, and we're a very melodic people. It's not so rhythm based. So that's all I can say.
Yeah, so it's just very in your roots. I mean, that's one of the things I love seeing, is like how every country has their own staple genre of music that they've invented, for lack of a better word, and that's only in metal, whereas like pop music and stuff like that, it's pretty much the same everywhere. Korean pop is a lot like American pop, just sung in a different language. And the varying degrees of how the genres sound is crazy, because you don't really hear that in any other genre of music. And I've always found that like very fascinating, how countries just kind of invented and owned these kind of specific genres.
Yeah, that's very true. And I think it's good that when you're metal, it's not so generic that you just kind of take some kind of what I could say country flavor. I mean, the country, not the music style, the country you are from. And you just say, no, that sounds too much like the country we are from. Let's make it super generic so people think we are from anywhere. I like it that you can hear that this band is from Finland.
Yeah.
I like that I can hear that these guys are probably Russian, these are probably German, because you have that sense. You can pick up something from the folk music or from the way the country feel somehow, you know? And that's one of the things why so many Swedish bands, we tried so hard with some bands to sound American or sound whatever. And the guys were just, no, you don't sound anything like American. But we love that. You try to sound like an American band, but you fail miserably. But we love your accent. We love the way you think you write a country song, but you have no clue. But you still create a completely new genre, which is kind of Swedish country music. And bam, they're number one on Billboard or whatever. Or the thing that happened with ABBA or whatever. They tried to dabble with that kind of country's special music. But they did it with a kind of a Swedish twist to it without really knowing it. And that made it super cool for the country they were aiming at, but also for the country they were from. Like, oh, this is a fresh twist on our Swedish music with that Latin or that whatever vibe to it, you know? So, there's a lot of successful crossovers with Swedish stuff.
Yeah, big time. I mean, I think that was like the biggest thing that influenced a lot of stuff over here was like the Swedish explosion of music. You saw it like melody instantly just get into American music and British, and you know, it swept a lot of other countries, you know?
Yeah.
So one last thing I want to talk about here. I don't want to take up too much of your time.
It's cool.
Bloodbath. You started that with Katatonia guys and Opeth, you know, Michael Ekelfeld. Nightmares Made Flesh is also celebrating a 15-year anniversary.
Oh, yeah, that's true.
Yeah. So how did you guys, you know, I mean, obviously you're all peers and stuff, but what brought about the idea to start Bloodbath?
Well, this is... Well, the story has been well documented, but I think I'll get it right when I say that I was, at the time we started it was like in the end of the 90s.
Yep.
I was trying to find a new machine to record my stuff. This was after Moon Tower, and I recorded Diabolical Masquerade and stuff. I was looking for like a 16-track portable unit with a hard disk recording and go all digital and all that stuff. And I knew from experience that I wanted to be able to record a full setup with drums, full everything. It should be a proper machine. The only way to try something really is to record really something with like 3-4 members, all live, all at the same time, and really give it hell and see if it's worth all the money you're going to invest in it. So I just, out of the blue, came up with this weird idea that I would invite Anders and Jonas from Katatonia, because I had worked with Anders pretty recently with Diabolical Masquerade, and we were like still in kind of this, you know, you become more like friends when you are recording a couple of weeks together, and like, you know, I thought I could call him up and say, hey, come over. And they had written in my diary from Unisound, on the Katatonia page, they wrote, when will Bloodbath record?
Oh.
And I looked at that in the time. I said, what's Bloodbath? Yeah, we wanted to have a kind of old school, well, it was not really old school in the time. We want kind of like an American death metal band. Sounds like a mix of Malevolent Creation and that style, and also a bit Cancer and this and that. I thought, oh, that's funny. You should come here and record it sometime. Yeah, we will, you know. And I always envisioned Jonas and Anders coming with their death metal project, old school, you know.
Yeah.
And that never happened. So they were super surprised. Like, what? You remember this? That we wanted to yes, like, yeah, come, let's form Bloodbath. I will play drums, you will play bass, and you will play guitar. And yeah, and Mike, he can come along and sing. I said, yeah, fine, whatever. Show up. And we had a super cool weekend. And on the Friday, I think it was, they showed up. We went straight to the studio. We wrote and recorded 2 songs, Breeding Death and Omnium ominous blood vomit, completely with everything. And we made then a rough mix on a cassette, and we took it home, and then we partied in the evening and listened to this and had so much fun deciding what to do with this. We all came up with the idea that we should pretend it's a demo from like 91 that never made it with the explosion of death metal demos. All of a sudden it was a death metal band in every corner. And that was Bloodbath from Stockholm. We made a fake thanks list, fake names, and we were just kind of trying to blend it in. Oh, you heard of Bloodbath, the early Stockholm? No, I never heard of it. Listen, and try to fake it into the tape trading circuit. And we were having a laugh and thinking all was super fun. And that was the plan. And then the guys went home, and I went down to the studio, and I completely erased everything.
Oh, no.
Yeah, I pushed the undo button too many times, or the scroll wheel went back too many undos or whatever, and there was no redo.
Oh, my goodness.
It's just like, oh, shit. In 1 second, I just erased all that funny shit. All I had left was this rough mix on a cassette. And that was such an anti-climax. And I gathered up the strength to call the guys. I think I called Anders and said, I'm so sorry. This really cool thing we recorded, I erased it. And they were like, no, really? Yeah, I'm sorry. I'm not kidding. But I will pay your bus tickets, come back. I will not buy that piece of equipment. I will go back to using tape. And I will try then the ADAT version, this 8-track digital on tapes that you cannot erase so easily. And I synced 2 ADATs up, bought a digital console, and they came back, I don't know, weeks or months later. And then it was a little bit weird. It was first like, oh, so sorry that you had to come back. But we all knew we were onto something. We wanted this to be mixed properly. So let's just re-record the songs like this shit never happened. And then we just wrote one more song called Furnace Funeral. And that one had that Swedish death metal vibe, but not the sound. It was still an American sound, but the death metal vibe from the riffing, and also the rip-off from the left-hand path bell keyboard section is total rip-off from Left-Hand Path. And that was then it. It became a little bit more serious. The sound was pretty good. And somewhere the whole idea of leaking this as a demo kind of disappeared, and all of a sudden Century Media wanted to release it as a mini album.
Wow.
And that was that. And I think, oh, cool. Then this recording will be released. End of story. End of Bloodbath. But yeah, it became kind of a hit. It was actually kind of an anniversary a little bit for death metal. Around that time, it was not really super hip to play old school death metal in like 99, 98, 99. And and the guys just contacted me again. Cool, now the label wants a full-length album. And I said, no, I'm not really interested, because that was, for me, a recording one-off. But then I came up with the idea that if we do it as a tribute to pretty much Left-Hand Path, in my way, to the Sunlight sound, to the 10-year anniversary of the death metal explosion in Sweden that we were all a part of, then I'm ready. Then I have a goal. I will crush that sound, which no records had anymore at the time. So let's just try to write music and let it sound like a Sunlight record that came out in 1990. Then I'm on board. And that just happened. I wrote a bunch of songs. Jonas wrote a few. Anders wrote a few. And we recorded it. And that was Resurrection Through Carnage. And then things just repeated again for Nightmares Made Flesh. Mm-hmm. But I felt extremely weird, because my drumming ability in the death metal is kind of more like based on pretty simple stuff. But I wanted to take Bloodbath one step further, and also a little bit away from this simple Sunlight thing, keeping the guitar tone, but kind of expanding, because I knew that Anders and Jonas wanted to have extremely fast blast beats, super complicated drum fills in their songs. I was happy with my kind of Leprosy style,
Yeah.
But I know that I was holding them back. So I said, okay, let's find a session drummer. And it was pretty clear that Mike was not going to be in the lineup, so let's also find a session singer. And we thought for drummers, we thought about everyone really, Gene Hoglan, Nick Barker, all these guys, and singers. We thought about Dave Vincent. I think we even came to asking for his fee, which was like twice the recording budget or whatever.
Wow.
So that didn't happen. And and at the end of the day, we settled with Peter Techtgren, which was a customer of mine because I was then working full-time in a music store. So Peter was buying shit from me when he was upgrading Abyss. And I just kind of asked him, hey, by the way, I'm having a funny project. Would you mind singing? Sure, why not? Here's the money. It's a one-off studio thing. You know, we teach you the song, you sing it, you forget it, next one. And with the drummer thing is a really funny story that during my daytime in the music store, I was talking to a guy in the store. We were like a chain of stores, like Guitar Center. So there was one also away in Linköping, which was an hour away or whatever. And I was talking to this guy called Mattias Camillo, which was a stand-in guitar player for Hypocrisy on their touring. And he was also in a couple of black metal bands and this and that, and had recorded in Abyss. And, we kind of talked mainly about music, not too much about what we were supposed to sell in the shop. And out of the blue, I told him, yeah, we're putting this Bloodbath stuff together, but we're having trouble finding a suitable drummer. I just kind of mentioned it. And he said, you should try the drummer in my band. And it's like, yeah, of course I should try the drummer in your band. No, I mean Gene Hoglan, I mean super famous, super machine. But no, the drummer is really good. I'm telling you, he's playing with Jensen in Satanic Slaughter. And I was like, Jensen, who's now in Haunted, and he's a really picky bastard. I guess your drummer is really good, And I think, I will keep that in mind. And when all other drummer options, I called Snowy Shaw even and asked him if he would be up for it and this and that. And it kind of didn't happen. I don't remember why. It was kind of talking more about how much do you want, not like what would it cost. So that kind of ended. I think, I will actually go with the drummer from his band. And I found out his name's Martin Axenroth, and he's today in Opeth. And I just said, okay, let's hook me up with your guy. Tell him to show up at the Fascination Street studio on that day, that o'clock, to record the drums for the Bloodbath record. And the other guys were like, you did what? So a friend of someone you don't know is now playing the drums instead of Gene Hoglan or whatever. It's like, yeah, I think it will work out. Just trust me on this one. I think when Jensen like him, and he's good to a click track, which was extremely important because everything was already recorded to a drum computer. He would just replace the programming and get out of there. And he just showed up and nailed everything. We were just like, wow, who is this drummer? Where did he come from? He could play traditional heavy metal stuff, super fast double bass, super fast blast beats. And I remember, I think Jonas or Anders, they were going on the talkback microphone. Could you play a fill, something like, and it was like something like this. And he just played what they were kind of telling him with their mouths over the talkback microphone. He was just kind of playing that fill back to them like, oh yeah, that's exactly what I had in mind. Do this fill, and it just worked, and that was like, okay, for me, that was, good. We found our session drummer. He recorded the drums, and I don't know what will become of it. And the album came out, and it was pretty big success, I guess, So it was all so weird that we were trying to find the big-ass singer, the big-ass drummer. But, I'm not saying that Peter Techtgren is not a big-ass singer, but at that time, he was like a friend of mine and, like in the close circle. And I thought, yeah, but he sing really good. So why not? Why does it have to be a famous, expensive session guy recording in the States or whatever? Let's just bring him to the studio. And yeah, it was pretty much me, Jonas and Anders, and what we considered two session dudes. And we were telling them what to do and pay them for their service. And yeah, eventually Martin ended up in Bloodbath as a part of the lineup and later on in Opeth. And after the Wacken gig we did, Bloodbath needed to go somewhere, to go away or go full time. And I was rather unceremoniously fired from Bloodbath, finding out over the internet. But that is water under the bridge because I did not have any intention of ever being a member of a touring real band Bloodbath. That was just not happening for me. But the way they kind of told me that you are replaced was kind of strange. But I know the guys from Katatonia don't always do things the traditional way, you know? So I was like, okay, I am not in Bloodbath anymore. Okay, best of luck, you know? I was replaced pretty much by this sodomizer guy. And they went on, and that was kind of Bloodbath happening all over again. But this time, I know they tried with the singer from somewhere. They were already in the studio. It didn't work out, and they had to call in Mike to do the vocals because they were actually recording the vocals like tomorrow. Yeah, and then he kind of stayed, you know? That was kind of how it happened then, from what I've heard. But there's been many bloodbaths along the way. But it was really, really funny, actually, to have been a part of that and to see that it's still, I mean, I went and saw them opening up for Creator just a couple of weeks ago.
Yeah, they put out a record last year.
Yeah, they're super nice guys, and all is, we are super on a good level, and all is well. It's a good part of my musical heritage. And it's always funny to hear people like yourself. And so, yeah, I knew you from Bloodbath. I'm like, huh? Okay. Some other guys, I only know you from Bloodbath. What? You know, how can all the other shit I've done like pass completely by? But Bloodbath, that's what you know? So it's like they raised above a little bit because of the Opeth connection maybe, or better distribution. I don't know, but there were some guys I even worked with them said, no, I only know you as the drummer or guitar player from Bloodbath. Okay, good to know, but I'm fine with it. But it's sometimes weird.
I think too, when you're talking about it, it definitely sounded to me too, like in your mind, it was only going to be a studio recording project, period, so I guess it kind of makes sense if they wanted to go on and tour. They probably could have kept you around as like the studio musician and let them go tour with whoever, but I guess I also understand wanting somebody full time.
I was making my own rules on how things should be, I wanted to simplify things, and I don't want to learn songs, but they come from a more traditional background where you learn all the shit, you play live, you do it, this is the way we do it. But I was not having any of that. I wanted to go on and make another Nightmares Made Flesh. I write my songs and this and that, but I understand why they kicked me out. But it was the way it was done was a little bit, what can I say, unusual for me,
Yeah, and that's gotta be hard.
That pissed me off for a long time, but at the end of the day, I get it why they did it. So that's water under the bridge. That's not really a problem anymore.
Yeah, I guess, with age and time, you eventually like forgive people and realize like, hey, we were younger and things happen.
Yeah.
It's good to forgive.
Also, after the whole Edge of Sanity thing was completely weird also because of how that ended, me wanted to commit mutiny and completely take over the project without thinking for a second that maybe the other guys want to also be in Edge of Sanity, but that's just how it is sometimes.
Yeah, it's a hard thing, man, when you have members and maybe you're not vibing creatively or even just personally, and who gets to keep what part of the band after that point, because you don't go into a band signing contracts being like, you get this, you get this, you get this. It's just like, hey, we want to have fun and be creative, and then
you change also as persons.
Yeah.
This is also very important.
Yep. Well, Dan, thank you so much for doing this, man. I mean, in my opinion, you've cemented and fostered the Swedish music scene from behind the scenes, and cemented your place in heavy metal history, in my opinion. And
that's cool to hear.
Yeah, no, man, this was such a fun conversation. I had a good time, and like hearing all your stories was awesome.
Yeah, there's quite a few. Yeah, it's nice spreading them. I don't do much interviews anymore, and I think sometimes it's when I can stumble across an interview or a biography or whatever, and hear all that. I mean, face it, even at the height of fame, all the interviews made by my favorite bands, they didn't really talk much about what kind of drum heads they were using when they recorded that album, or, that it's just like, oh, we're going on tour, we're going to rock, that kind of stuff. So I love to hear a little bit more about the weirdness, how shit almost never happened, and why that guy ended up. And now I know why. I thought all the time, why they picked this guy to join that band. And I think, same management. That's like 9 out of 10 times they share the management. That's what I found out through all this bios, you know. And now it's a little bit, it's going around. You look, oh, why is this guy in that band? Oh, they have the same manager, or they're on the same label, you know, because they're like a good, they're a good guy, you know, good workmanship. And I think it's also in this roadie world, guitar tech, whatever, it's all word of mouth. Like, you know, any good, you should try this guy. He's super good. You know, you don't go advertising really. You know,
True.
So I think it's so cool to hear. How the fuck did you end up in this band? Yeah, because I was the roadie for that, and then I stepped in for that band, and they needed a new and blah blah. Oh, okay. You never talk about that in the interviews, you know.
Yeah.
But I like to know a little bit behind the scenes. I was always a little bit of a junkie for that kind of weird stuff, and I'm so disappointed every time I buy a book from someone. Oh, now I get to know more, and then you just kind of skip the whole recording process.
Yeah,
wow, you know.
that's how I am too. Like I like knowing like all the little behind the scenes things that people don't normally talk about, and that's kind of like my goal when I talk to somebody is to get that out of them, you know, not worry about them, you know.
Yeah, I still have a few secrets. I don't think there's a need for some people to know some shit.
Sure.
But there are some times I think it's funny how fate, you know, how stuff just happened and how one thing led to another. My whole career was also, it was just like random. I never really thought, should I accept the offer to record this band from whatever, because I didn't know them, or not? You know, I just said yes to everything. They showed up, and eventually they became super big, and one day I would get a gold record from this band. You know, it's like, hey, how did that happen? You know, but some people are so that they need to know background stories. They need to hear stuff. They need to think about it, blah, blah, blah. I'm just like, yeah, send it over. Come on, you know, let's just do this.
Yeah.
And this paid off in spades in so many cases.
That's definitely my mentality too, man. I say yes to everything I can. You know, even if I'm not particularly like into a band when I'm doing this, it's like, well, why not? What do I have to lose from saying yes? Yeah, I think that's a good mentality to have. So, man, I swear I would love to pick your brain more about recording Dissection, but maybe we'll have to do that another time, because that's like one of my favorite bands, and you know, John's not alive to talk about him, so at least somebody that was.
No, but I think I don't really remember that much. I do remember some weird stuff from around the sessions. So if you ever do like something about an anniversary for a Storm of the Lightsbane or whatever, yeah. You know, we could have a conversation.
Sure. Yeah, I definitely will be.
Cool.
Awesome. Well, Dan, thank you so much for your time, man. I really, really appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you too. Yeah, and let me know when it's whatever available somewhere.
Yeah, I'll probably hold this one back for a couple weeks, just to kind of let a couple other things get out there, and I'll just shoot you an email when I got it all ready to go.
That's like super.
Awesome. All right,
okay.
Man. Well, have a good rest of your day.
See you. Yeah, you too.
All right.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Be excellent to each other. And